Welcome back to the Go Have Good Sex podcast, the show where faith and pleasure finally stop fighting. I'm Angela, the Christian sexpert, sex coach, truth teller, and your new favorite bedtime devotional. If you're ready to go deeper, check out my resources for couples and individuals, from my free 15-minute coaching consults to spicy but faith-friendly resources like the Marriage Playdate, to my Patreon, where I teach you all the things your church aunties never told you about. And yeah, you know I've got it covered with merch, journals, bookmarks, and everything in between at thechristiansexpert.com. So whether you're here to learn, to heal, or to spice things up with scripture and sass, I'm your girl, and I'm so glad you're here. Let's get into today's episode, and remember, go have good sex. Welcome back to Go Have Good Sex, the podcast where we challenge purity culture, heal what the church forgot to teach, and help Christian couples build marriages full of safety, connection, and really good sex, of course. Today, I'm joined by my friend, Dr. Ashley Hudson. You've heard her on the podcast before talking about how do we talk to our kids about sex, but today we're talking about a different angle. She's a therapist, speaker, and educator who somehow manages to blend humor, heart, and hard truth all at once. She's the founder of Pearl in Process and a follower of Jesus, wife and mom who brings her faith into every part of her work. Her doctoral research explored how women raised in evangelical purity culture navigate sexuality and identity after becoming mothers, and how things like cognitive flexibility, post traumatic growth, and faith can actually become pathways to healing and satisfaction. If you've ever felt like motherhood changed your body, your marriage, or your sense of self, girl, same. And we know that purity culture left you unprepared for all of those changes. Girl, you're in the right place. We're talking about shame, sex, and the sacred journey of rebuilding intimacy after birth. Let's get into it. Okay, so welcome back to the show, Dr. Ashley.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
I'm excited that I get to call you Dr. Ashley now.
So
All right. Tell us a bit about your background and what prompted you to study the effects of purity culture and postpartum maternal mental health.
sure. Well, it's quite a long story. And so to spare you and listeners from spending hours here, I have been focusing on perinatal mental health for about the last decade or so, due to my own experience of severe postpartum depression. And after climbing out of that experience, I decided to really focus solely on that. And so when I opened my practice, it was really solely just serving parents in that perinatal stage. So from pregnancy to postpartum. And because of kind of the fact that I follow Jesus and I cross paths with a lot of other people from Christian environments and backgrounds, a lot of my clientele inevitably ended up being people from varying faith backgrounds. I'm also licensed in Texas and North Carolina, so I kind of had the Bible Belt folks who were kind of needing that support. And I just happened to be specializing in it. And I was noticing as I was kind of moving through the stages of treatment with these clients that there inevitably came a period of time where we began negotiating with roles and relationship to pleasure, both sexually, but just like also she wants to have a meal and shower, like just the standard things that come up for moms. And just the state shifting. So moving from what I call and laugh is like a walking napkin milking situation to shifting into what she wants to be, which is like an individual erotic woman sometimes, or just a professional woman. And so I was working a lot with these transitions of roles and, the coexisting of being both. And I noticed some scripts that we were rewriting, like social scripts that have been handed to these women, really were stemming from purity culture and some of the indoctrination within purity culture and being socialized female within the US during that period of time. So a lot of folks who were in the adolescent stage of development during the purity culture movement, which was between 90s, early 2000s, were of reproductive age. So they were starting to become pregnant and birth and land in my office. What I found to be really interesting is that some of these folks moved through treatment and actually left my office with greater autonomy and access to pleasure and pride in their bodies than when they entered. And some people had a harder time getting to that place. And I wanted to understand the difference. I wanted to understand, like, how come some people are actually able to move into a place of sexual satisfaction and just, I guess, positivity and mood as well, and in their relationship with themselves and their partners. How come some it was easier than others? And so that's why, as I began studying sexuality and sexual functioning, I not only wanted to focus on moms, because I think there's a lot of unique factors that surface during becoming a mother that cross paths and kind of intersect with our sexuality in ways that aren't often spoken about. But also, I wanted to hit on the purity culture theme because I saw the script surfacing in ways that really were restrictive and causing a lot of just psychological and sometimes even physiological pain for women. So that's why. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. Yeah. And the next one. But when you say you saw some of the scripts and how they were playing out, what do you mean by scripts?
Yeah. So social script theory is kind of stemming from sociology. And well, it is stemming from sociology. And it's just this concept that the world gives us a paradigm of what to expect and what's expected of us. So when you go to the bathroom, when you're done, hopefully you wash your hands. You would expect that, right? There's like a script that goes with what to expect when you come in and exit a restroom. There are all sorts of scripts, and one that's really clearly handed to women who were socialized and went through this movement were gendered scripts. This is what is expected of you as a woman in this subculture of the Christian household. And we all kind of got a different flavor of that. What I see most broadly within my clientele was you are kind of the gatekeeper of the home when it comes to values and morals. You are the comforter. You are
Okay, so wait, we need to talk about if the woman is the gatekeeper of the home for values and morals, how does that also line up with the men are supposed to be the spiritual leaders?
yeah, it's a very strange kind of conflicting. I think men are kind of positioned, at least within pretty strict complementarian communities, as the decision makers. And ultimately, decision makers come with the most authority and power. At least that's what we believe as a society. And women are seen more as the caretaker of the home and the children. And because she has more eyes and time on the children, she therefore is expected to filter out what comes in their little ears and eyes. And so, in many regards, for some people, that translated into becoming stay at home, sour bread making, you know, like homeschooling moms. For others, it looks different. Some become some sort of leader within the church, teaching Bible study or what have you. But all in all, there are a lot of complexities in the socialization in these scripts, and that is what I believe leads women to kind of a mental crisis of how can I do all of the things? How can I be, the filter of the value system and subordinate or submissive to a partner if they follow, more complementarian theology. So,
Okay. ADHD, impulsivity was like, wait, you're not wrong that women are handed the script about being the moral, you know, gatekeeper of the house, but also complementarian tells them they have to submit, and that's hard. Okay. So, what are some of the other scripts that you saw showing up for your clients with like that purity culture handed them?
yeah, I think the yes script, the you either kind of where you remain agreeable, and the script that you keep everyone happy, in particular the partner, your husband, who is socialized to have a high sexual appetite and given a script that he needs sex every few hours in order to remain sane and stable. And so the script is you put out every 72 hours, you say yes when he initiates. You are not allowed to initiate. You are the more sexually like dormant creature in the relationship. Um, so I think that there's kind of this almost in my dissertation, the way I frame it up is like a repackaging of the Victorian era, where there's this
Mm.
like fragility of womanhood and expectation of what it means to be pure. And then women are kind of thrown into this marriage where they really do, and it said, I quote, um, I think it's Grigori's article, and Swatsky, is that how you say her last name? Where she says,
Gregoire.
yeah, women from
Yeah.
the purity culture movement were told to um, they live out the Madonna horror complex. And
Yeah.
that gets really complicated really quickly already in marriage. It gets that much more complicated when suddenly her breasts are producing milk and she's, sleep deprived and bleeding and having an identity crisis. So, yeah, those are some of the scripts I see.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so we're gonna get super nerdy. I want to know, when you began your research, what were your beginning hypotheses and how did they pan out?
So with my methodology, the type of methodology that I chose is a reflexive thematic analysis, and it's qualitative in nature. And so with some of that, there is
Okay,
me.
hold up. Translate it. Translate
So,
it.
like Brene Brown, she's a qualitative researcher where we're looking at words, we're looking at themes as they present in a subpopulation or sample. Um, And I think that within some qualitative research, there are hypotheses that are really thrown out within quantitative research as well. Within mine, it was I didn't really formally throw out a ton of hypotheses. What I anticipated was that there would probably be more um, marital egalitarianism or equality within the marriage of those who experienced higher levels of sexual satisfaction. I anticipated there being people who identified as deconstructing or agnostic or atheist being among those who reported higher levels of sexual satisfaction. And for the most part, those hypotheses were right. I also I had a hypothesis that those who felt more freedom around the subject of masturbation and self-stimulation would experience higher levels of sexual satisfaction. That's a hypothesis I still hold, but it's not something I really tested for or specifically leaned into during my interviews. So,
I think that there is other research out there though that proves that hypothesis that
yeah.
women um with more masturbate, like, what is the right phrasing that I'm looking for? Women
Yeah,
who
women who have more comfortable positioning on the subject of masturbation and who engage in self-pleasure
Yes,
experience higher levels of sexual satisfaction. And there's already research.
when partnered. Yes. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. There is already a lot of research out there that more or less supported my hypotheses. And so in many ways, I was just seeing, do those hold up among this population? Because when you do research, studying the purity culture movement can be really tricky because people operationalize that differently. Meaning, when it comes to individuals, being screened in for a sample, how are they measuring purity culture? How are they choosing to say, yeah, I lived through that movement? Does it mean they had a purity ring? Does it mean they went to a purity ball? Does it mean that they signed an abstinence pledge? And if so, does it mean they stood by it? So I think, I had to really suss through for me what I wanted to define it by, which was pretty broad. And because of that, I didn't know if the pre-existing literature would line up with my population's experience. And it did for the most part.
That's something that I run into a lot is in my content is women who I know with 1,000% certainty you live through purity culture, but you are fighting me, telling me, no, you didn't. But
Mhm.
the fact that you think that, girls have to wear t-shirts at the beach so that your teenage boys don't sin tells me
Mm,
that you lived through purity culture. And
mm,
there's a lot of, I think, lack of education about what purity culture is, but also self-awareness of individuals who were victimized by purity culture.
yeah. And fear too, right? What I found even in my own research is that those who do still identify as Christian and are identifying themselves as individuals who experience purity culture are very protective over the reputation of Christians and of biblical purity. And you and I have talked about this, and we talk about it a lot on social media, is the difference between biblical purity and purity culture. And so sometimes it's just lack of information. Sometimes it's just different rhetoric. We're using different words for the same thing. Um, and honestly, I do see a lot of people and even my clients, like when I push against some of the frameworks that that they're standing by, not from a place of trying to convince them, but just from a place of curiosity and wanting them to get curious about their own belief system. Is this, oh my gosh, if I let go of this, is my whole existential framework and faith going to crumble? And I don't have energy for that when I'm a postpartum woman. So yeah,
I don't have energy for that like 11 years later.
it's true. Yeah, a lot. Mhm.
Okay. So, one of the things that you noticed in your research was it seemed like women were reclaiming their agency or autonomy and their rights to their own sexuality and pleasure in the birth and postpartum period. But then you said that your supervisors suggested they might have actually been claiming it for the first time. So, can you talk about this? Like, one of my specific questions is, how are Christian women who are raised in purity culture robbed of their sexuality by the church?
Yeah, I think when we look at purity culture movement and some of the literature and just media that was consumed by that generation, we're looking at individuals who were told really early on that their bodies are, good and they're treasures and they are temples of the Holy Spirit. They were given, as a generation, given a lot of truth and a lot of things that even I would tell my daughter, right? And my son. That's a whole different conversation. But your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit. It's a treasure, it's special, it's sacred. And that was translated to in their minds, I'm a stumbling block, and sometimes more overtly told they were a stumbling block. And just systems of coercion the church isn't very good at understanding power differentials and what that means and the potential impact or negative impact, unintended consequences of carrying power, which as therapists we learn a lot about. And I wish that those who go into any kind of ministry were required to pass some tests that actually show they have ideas and awareness around their power and what it can mean. But I think with this population, I was noticing during the period of pregnancy and postpartum, women have to get up close and personal to their bodies in a way that they hadn't before. So before becoming pregnant, they were able to kind of dissociate or go through life and deny their bodies from the neck down. And some of them did to remain socially safe and emotionally connected, if not to their church community, to their family system, and eventually, to their peer network as well back in the purity culture days, but also to their partner if their partner comes from a similar socialization. So for this population, you can't really deny yourself from the neck down once you get pregnant. It's really hard. That first visit to the gynecologist will tell you that really quickly. And so to go from this place of I'm a fragile woman to, oh, I'm a birthing beast and, can do this is quite a shift um, in the female mind. And so I was noticing, first of all, what I thought was really powerful was that women were becoming informed about their bodies, some for the first time. It broke my heart every time I'm in a clinical space and someone tells me the first time they saw their vulva was when they were pushing a baby out. That is so
Oh my
tragic,
gosh.
and that is so common. That's a common experience. Many women didn't, even look at their genitals until they were required to check on their stitching because they were having some pain or something like that. And so for a lot of women, they were becoming, for the first time, really aware of not only their genitals, but their functioning as a female, what it meant to be a cycling person. Um, and then moving through birth, all of a sudden aware of their power because they just grew and birthed a human. That comes with some breakthrough from, individual psyche where the woman is like, wait a minute, my body can do something very different than what his body can do. Most of them are in relationships with men that I mean, all of them from my sample. And that was a very empowering and positive experience, even if there was birth trauma, even if these women walked away from their birth with physical and mental trauma, pursuing support and mental health care and healing, especially in the format, not just within therapy, but in a peer to peer context, really correlated with high levels of sexual satisfaction. So I think that the birthing experience opened women up to various systems, whether it was peer to peer networks of other moms who were suddenly talking about their genitals because they just spread their legs for the whole world to see while they pushed a baby out. So, like, suddenly there's this new freedom to say what is so. Um, or because they're going to the doctor and for the first time having a very, very practical and clear conversation about their genitals, what hurts and what doesn't. And for some women, this is the first time they've done that. So I think that's part of the reason. I had one participant say, like, I couldn't step foot near a hospital because any whiff of coercion would completely shut me down. I suffered so greatly by the purity culture movement, and it led me to really abusive and coercive experiences in relationships. Therefore, when it comes to birth, I'm birthing at home. That is my story and my ability to reclaim my power, not mine, but my participant. So I think that we see echoes of women reclaiming their autonomy and power that's been taken from them. And I can talk about the story of my faculty member that was like, it looks like these women are claiming their sexuality and their rights to pleasure for the first time. And I was sitting there kind of processing that, and in many ways was like, shoot, he's right. I totally missed this. And then I realized, no, the church really did claim it first because they were the ones that called these girls to lay it down. Um, they called these women to say, I don't have a body from the shoulders down, or I'm going to say yes and smile and bat my eyelashes. And in doing so, I don't know that it was an overt intentional decision, but in doing so, they claimed rights to a woman's sexuality and to a woman's body. And what's problematic about that is they claim the rights. So it really wasn't the women laying their bodies down at the feet of Jesus saying, "Hey, I'm yours. I'm fully devoted, life laid down. It's all yours, Jesus." It was, "Here's my body, church. I will use it according to what your manual says and what your scripts say for me to belong." And those are two very different things. And again, where we begin seeing differences in biblical purity and purity movement.
I to your participant who said, I will never give birth in a hospital again. Man, I feel that so hard. I
Mhm.
can't I can't even hardly go to, like, any regular doctor without fighting them because I'm like, "Do you none of you understand what informed consent and power imbalances just in, like, literally prescribing antibiotics." Like,
Mhm.
I understand the side effects of the antibiotics, and you're, like, dismissing my questions about these. Like, I can't even that's a whole other rant for another day, but yes, so much yes. Okay. I'm really curious because you were talking about, like, even participants who had birth trauma were then feeling more empowered to reclaim their pleasure. And so that on the surface doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense.
Mhm.
So can we talk more about reclaiming of pleasure?
Yeah. Yeah. What I saw with a lot of these women, first of all, they weren't really taught about pleasure. Some of my sample, at least a couple individuals from my sample, didn't have their first orgasm until postpartum. They didn't know about the female orgasm. They weren't really taught that their bodies served much more than incubators for baby making and mothering. And so for these individuals, coming out of there's one theme I have that explicitly says from pain to pleasure, being able to name the the discomfort in the presence of a supportive partner and clinician, so a supportive birth worker or midwife or OB, um, having that relationship with them in which there is honor and they believe what she says, and this is what hurts. And then the provider is able to say, okay, that's called vaginismus, and that's actually not what we want for you. For some women, that postpartum season is the first time that they've accessed care in a supportive environment where they were able to identify something and get a diagnosis like vaginismus, dyspareunia, something like that. The other piece of it are especially for my participants who had girls, who birthed girls, this was a really hard time for them because they looked at their baby girl and were like, I don't want her to struggle in the same way I did. I want her to know that her body is perfect because I grew it and God's good, whatever their narrative was. Like, this is a perfect body and I want her to be able to enjoy it. And so that desire and motivation really began with her motivation for her daughter to have a better experience than she had. And from there, they began getting curious about like, wait, as some of them said, I had one client or one participant say, I I never really saw a vulva until I changed my like daughter's diaper. And so I think for some women, they're not only getting up close and personal to their own bodies, but then it's like they birth a body and they're like, oh gosh, I have to parent this little one through a lot of stages, and one of those is sexual development. And so for many women, they're starting to wrap their heads around it, and they're beginning to reconceptualize what sexual satisfaction can mean. For some women, it was the first time they were able to say, you know what? I don't want to orgasm. I just want to be, unclothed and hang out with you. And to me, that's sex and that's satisfaction right now. And for others, they said, you know what? For the first time, I felt comfortable demanding my orgasm and saying, no, I want to enjoy this as well. And that birthing again was like a turning point or a reflection point where they were able to say, my body is so capable of so much. And I just did all of this, whether it was suffer or, endure or persevere. And now I get to enjoy some of what it means to live in a body too. So I saw all of that spectrum in my data.
That's amazing. Did you see any connections between purity culture messaging and postpartum depression or anxiety, anything like that?
I didn't measure for it. So when it comes to research, we're always super careful to report on what we specifically measured for and
Right.
specifically got. And so I can say anecdotally from practice, I see a ton of correlation between the socialization of the purity culture movement and levels of anxiety and depression. There is some research out there. I can't cite it off the top of my head, but I can get it to you. That talks about the experience of women from faith communities and their reports of perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. I do think, like, women who are born into really rigid systems that require very specific performance of them in order to feel or like they belong and like they're safe, have higher levels of anxiety. Because why wouldn't they? Like, that's a lot of pressure to put on someone. You have to perform this particular way in order to have a husband that doesn't abuse you and that provides for you, and that's a really scary position to be in as a vulnerable postpartum woman. So, um, I see anecdotally the experience of women feeling all of this pressure of what it means to be a mother, while also, I mean, first of all, many of the post marital scripts written during this time centered around very, like, affluent they had to center around white affluent folks in order to believe that every woman could stay home with their children,
Mhm.
right? That's a very privileged position. And um a lot we're landing in an economy that doesn't allow for that, like some previous economies, but the social script in many of these communities hasn't changed. Is that the expectation of women to stay home has not changed. And so we're dealing with a crisis as women of, wait, in order to remain in cooperation with the standards of my faith community, I need to do X, Y, and Z. Practically, that means I guess it's beans and rice, I don't know, like, what are we gonna do? And it is really a complex situation for a lot of women I work with, so, anyways, that might be unrelated, but I think it's important, and it plays into the fact that these women do experience high levels of anxiety.
Well, and that kind of leads into another question that I had, because one of the scripts that we are fed is this sort of good Christian woman messaging, right? And the stereotype of the good Christian woman and having to maintain that image and stereotype.
Mhm.
Um, and so how do you think that that message sort of intensifies in the postpartum experience?
For some for some, I think it does. I think that there's extra pressure put on women when suddenly they're holding a little baby and they realize what a significant opportunity and significant call that is on their lives. Um, for many women though, I talked about this in my defense. The sanctification of motherhood, meaning the ability for the church to say, hey, motherhood is more than just like a calling and a good idea and a fun thing and maybe will lead to a higher quality of life. It's also your purpose. It's your purpose for being on the planet. And that's an immense amount of pressure, um, when you believe like, "Oh, God's purpose for me is to do this very specific act." And for many women, they birth and have a baby, and all of a sudden, they are hit with a sudden sense of disappointment or disillusionment or confusion or overwhelm. And there's a lot of meaning we make in those spaces. I'm bad at this. I'm not meant to be a mom. I made a mistake. I hate this. But then we're ashamed to say that out loud. So then it's like we're battling in the dark on that. And it's becoming a little bit more common and thankfully acceptable to talk about the realities of misery for a lot of moms in those early days. Um, but I think that as we work through kind of the nuances of what it means to be a mom in those early stages, there has to be some flexibility around how we think about that role. Is it our ultimate calling? As we marry girls off, like, hey, this can look a zillion different ways. Um, so I don't even remember the question, but hopefully that kind of answered it.
Yeah, no, 100% because it was about, the good Christian woman
Yeah.
messaging stereotype. And, I was an anomaly in the church for years and years because we didn't get pregnant until we had been married for see, we had the first one was 2014, 2003, so we've been married for, like, 11 years
Mhm.
without kids, and in the very, very early days, people, because people always ask, "When are you gonna start having kids?" "Not now." Like, we didn't want kids. Like, we wanted kids eventually, but we didn't want kids in the really early days.
Mhm.
And so, I think if I had been raised in the church system, and also didn't have such an obnoxious personality, um, the pressure of the expectation that a good Christian wife gets married and starts popping them out would have been a lot harder to handle for me.
Yeah.
But I didn't come to Jesus until I was 19, and so I wasn't socialized with a lot of that messaging that a
Mhm.
lot of our followers and people listening to this were socialized with. And even but I still got it and I could recognize, that's what was happening. So I can't imagine the pressure if, that's what you had been raised with and that was what your family of origin was expecting or, things like that. Um, and then, you're talking about like the church telling women that their purpose is to be a mother. Well, fun fact, we battled infertility for a while, And so like if you're telling women that their purpose is to be a mother and her body just can't, even if it's not her fault, even if he's got terrible sperm, like that is just handing mental disorders on a silver platter. Okay, that's the unrelated rant, but what is a go have good sex podcast without an unrelated rant?
Yeah, great.
Okay, so we agree that purity culture messaging just becomes obligation sex messaging after the wedding. Um, don't have sex, don't have sex. Oh, now you're married, you have to have sex all the time whenever he wants it. And so one of the ways that we see like one of the examples because people get, people get really angry when I talk about this. But one of the practical ways that this shows up is telling new moms that they have to make sure to like give their husband a hand, even or a hand job, even if
Mhm.
they aren't up to having full on sex because he needs attention too and you don't want him to suffer or stray. So, did you find like two parts? Did you see any sort of evidence that purity culture messaging becomes obligation sex messaging? Um, or just kind of general thoughts on that nonsense?
Yeah, I think 100% of my data sample said something along those lines. I had a huge um, report, or you like code things for reflexive
Right.
thematic analysis. And so I had a huge code pool that was just duty, sex, obligation, sex messaging. So that was for sure blanket across my sample. And there have been other studies out there that demonstrate the ways that this culture translates into obligation or duty sex. Um, I think so many, even of my high scoring participants, reported feeling extremely anxious that if they did not provide some sort of quote unquote sexual release for their partners, that they would leave. And that was terrifying to them because they had a 3-week-old baby and they were tired and they needed someone to be there. Right. So I think this this permeates throughout the system and is a huge problem because these women need a break. They need to sleep. They need a partner who will help feed the baby when they can. And the other children, by the way, if there are other subsequent kiddos in the home, like, so I think the pressure is immense on women. And in this period of time, if it does feel like their bodies are continually being used and continually being needed. And so I did hear a lot, there were some women that were like, it just feels like I'm constantly needed. My breasts are needed, my vagina is needed. Like everyone needs me all of the time. And that completely depletes any drive that anyone has. And so that's one reason mental sharing of a mental load is the greatest thing anyone could do to raise a woman's libido or drive would be to help reduce the amount of things on her mind and to-dos on her list. Um, so anyway, I think for a lot of women during that period of time, um, they're learning that they can say no, and for some women, that comes through a lot of pain. But what I found to be really, really special and powerful were the amount of women who opened their mouths for the first time and said to their husband, "I am so sorry. I don't think I can do this. I know it's been 3 days." And the husband said, "What are you talking about?" The husbands were never told that every 72 hours they would get sex. The woman was the one told that and was operating under that script. And so I think that in that conversation for multiple participants in my study was the moment of intense emotional connection and attunement to one another that was a breakthrough for sexual satisfaction, is she finally felt seen and understood and permission to rest, which is what she needs during that time.
Did you have any participants whose husbands were not as wonderful and who were supporting the obligation sex message? And what sort of outcomes were there for those couples or that woman rather?
Right. My study centered really resilient folks, women who were having great sex and reported high levels of sexual satisfaction. I did also have a low scoring group. Um, I can remember one participant who came from a highly fundamentalist community in which, like, originally Christian domestic discipline was still supported within her community. It was a pretty intense, it was an intense interview.
Okay, we need to take a moment here. Christian domestic discipline is where um, it's in super fundamentalist circles, and they twist the scripture to believe that the husband should discipline his wife, and that often shows up as physical assault of
Mhm,
his wife. Um, or it is putting him in a father role over her. And then you get into some really sketchy um areas with that.
mhm, mhm.
A lot of it's I'm trying to not um make people want to turn the podcast off. It's a lot of abuse
Mm.
in that sort of community.
There's a lot of Yeah, there's a lot of abuse that's supported, um, and relabeled, repackaged as a good partner, discipleship, whatever. It's sad. And for this particular participant, she broke out of that. She and her husband both broke out of that.
Thank God.
Yeah. And she actually ended up marrying someone who was not a part of that community and who didn't support that level of fundamentalism within that community. However, the scripts came with her. The internal messaging of the purity culture movement stuck with her. And I did ask her because she still they still participated in a pretty fundamentalist community, though the that level of discipline wasn't supported. I asked her if she could say no to sex, and she said that wouldn't be appropriate. And so I think there was still some untangling of the messaging, but she also said, "This is the first time ever that I will enter that space and demand my own orgasm as well, and make sure that I leave there having fun too." And so while there, you see that the population, the sample I worked with, it was so beautiful because they were in process. They were in the middle of this extreme transition that was hard and complicated and untangling or deconstructing from certain belief systems. And I caught them right in the middle of it because they were postpartum. So this woman, she was still operating within the no, I can never tell him no. And she scored really high sexual satisfaction and was beginning to articulate what she wanted in the bedroom. She was beginning to say what was so for her, what felt good, what did not, and advocate for her own needs, which for her, coming from that environment, is huge. So I call that a win for her, and she scored really high, which I was happy to see. But I think there is, to answer your original question, a carryover of this obligation sex messaging, and it can be very dangerous during this period of time because women are easily coerced into showing up and doing whatever just to get people to be quiet and stop whining and stop complaining. And so I think whether it's a kiddo or a partner, this is often when partners begin falling into a category of they're another child. There's someone else I have to take care of. And there's nothing that will dilute or destroy eroticism and romance like that dynamic. So um, I think we're seeing this is a great opportunity for men and women to really reorient themselves to their role within the relationship and decenter themselves in the pleasure conversation a little bit, to notice one another and show up for one another with compassion and consideration of what the other person's going through. That doesn't mean, like, yes, she needs to give a hand job all the time. that just means she shows some level of compassion that he's horny. And great, go take care of that. I'm right here. Like, I'll lay right here, like come up with the solution. And I ask my pregnant when I'm working with couples and I'm working pre-baby because I do some preventative work around couples heading into the postpartum season. I'll ask them, what are you going to do when he's horny or she's horny and you can't show up? How can you allow one another to take power back over your own orgasm and reorient yourself to what pleasure means in this season? So, anyways, I think yes, it translates in almost all couples and it shows up in this season. And it's an incredible opportunity to rewrite the narrative around what to expect.
Okay, that leads to the 6-week mark.
I hate the 6 week check mark. The 6 and 8 week check mark drive me insane. Uh,
But why? She's ready to go at 6 weeks.
it just, I think ACOG, so the American College of Obstetrics and Gynecology, I can never get that right, is beginning to actually rewrite some of this because they're
Oh,
seeing
thank God.
so much pressure on women. And the truth of the matter is, yes, some women are having sex at 4 weeks postpartum because they want to. And some women are waiting a year, sometimes more. And that all of that is considered normal and healthy. It really, really depends on the individual. And the provider needs to be part of the conversation. The partner can be part of that conversation. But at the end of the day, she's the one living in her body. This is her body. And 6 weeks is awfully early after a birth to expect someone to do anything other than sleep or nurse, unless she wants to. And so I think,
Like, managing sleeping, nursing, and a shower all in the same day at 6 weeks,
right,
you should get a gold medal.
it's a lot. So adding on top of that, again, you want to do everything you can to reduce the dynamic of adding another parent or another dependent to your radar, and your partner can quickly become that if you aren't engaging in these conversations together. And the couples in my sample who had the highest levels, or the women who had the highest levels of sexual satisfaction, were those in which they experienced safety and emotional attunement 100% of the time. That doesn't necessarily mean he agrees
What
with.
is emotional attunement?
So instead of saying, like, I'm sorry, you're so tired, never mind. Actually noticing she's tired and saying, "Oh my goodness, I see how tired you are. This has been so exhausting for you, hasn't it? It's been tiring for me too. I know we're both in a hard space, right?" All it takes is some like attunement, meaning you mirror what the person's experiencing, you connect with them. You could step up your game and be a little empathetic and think of a time when you felt more was demanded of you than you could provide. um, Connect with that feeling and then talk with your partner about what that was like too, and that you are on the same page, you see the pain that they're going through. So I think that this period of time offers an opportunity for partners to practice healthy attunement and ongoing emotional safety and check-ins, and get creative with problem solving. It's also a great time to expand pleasure mapping. You and I do a lot of this work with couples when we're talking about, like, okay, sex is more than P and V. Sex is more than, whatever people have written it as in their mind.
PNV being penis and vagina,
Yes.
penetrative activities. So while we're on the subject of the 6-week topic, I want to point out that biblically in Leviticus 12, 40 days after a son's birth, which is 6 weeks, right? 40 days is 6 weeks. 30, it's almost 6 weeks, something like that. Somewhere in that range. 40 days for a son, 80 days for a daughter, which is almost 3 months. I'm confident in that one. It's almost 3 months for a daughter. In Leviticus 12, a man could not touch his wife, not just like have sex with her, but like touch her, right? And so There's and no, we no longer live under Levitical law. I get that. I'm aware. Okay. But when you think about why God gave Levitical laws to the ancient Jews, it wasn't just so he had a bunch of opportunities to go, "Oh, you suck. Oh, you sinned. Oh, you suck. None of you are good." Right? He was not just doing that. It was for the health, it literally like ancient OSHA, health and safety standards, right? If you think about like why God said not to eat shellfish, because they didn't have the science to tell if the shellfish were going to make them sick. Right? So if you look at why God gave the Jews Levitical law, it was to protect their health and safety. And so, no, we don't have to hold to the Levitical law of postpartum, but no touchy touchy. But God thought that was important enough to put in the Bible, which means there is a level of significance there. And your hormones are not designed to have sexy hormones in the postpartum season, especially if you are nursing. The prolactin produced in the nursing process actively suppresses spicy libido hormones. That's God's design because think about it. If a woman got pregnant at 6 weeks postpartum in ancient Israel, everybody was going to die. The new baby was going to die. The baby she was pregnant with was going to die. And she was probably going to die because of ancient medical care being what it was. But your body uses so much energy and minerals and vitamins to grow a baby, but also to make milk to sustain a baby. And they didn't have formula, they didn't have Gerber baby food.
Mhm.
It was all on her. Yes, there was probably some wet nursing going on, but
Mhm.
these are all like, if you zoom out to the bigger picture, this is all God's design for protecting women and children. And nobody was crying about not getting a hand job every 3 days because the men couldn't even touch her.
They figured it out.
Okay. That's my 6 week is a made up nonsense, stupid rule rant. Okay. I just needed to get that out there.
So true.
Right. What do you wish that pastors, birth workers, and therapists understood about the intersection of purity culture and postpartum mental health?
I think this goes back to power differential comment that I made. I think it's so important during whenever we're working with vulnerable people. As a social worker, I'm very present to like when we're working with vulnerable people, it's time to reconnect ourselves to our privilege and power and get curious about it and aware of the impact of it before we ever open our mouths. And one thing that you need to notice about this group of women for birth work, I would have different advice for all of those categories that you mentioned. For birth workers, my advice is go first. You have to rely on what we as sex therapists call the placid model, which is like just a model of care, but it starts with permission giving to people. And the way we provide that permission giving as therapists, and I know you as a coach, is by using words like penis, vagina, orgasm. We say the words first to open the door and let them know that it's okay to talk about it. The women
Unless we're on TikTok and then we use stupid words.
them were like quine. I don't know. It's a weird world out there. But for anyone in the medical community, you have to go first. This we have research that shows conservative birthing women are the least likely to bring up sexual complaints to their partners and to their providers. So you have to be the one to say what could be considered typical versus atypical and throw it out there and then see where she lands. And then for pastors, knowing the pressure that comes with sanctified motherhood and simultaneously knowing the way this movement socialized women to abdicate power is important because she is going to be in the middle of a season in which she's learning to use her voice, learning to negotiate her power and her roles because now she's actually really protective of that baby. She has a lot of hormones flying through her brain and body that say that is her job, and it is. And so giving her opportunities to say what is so for her, giving her flexibility to try on new places of serving or teaching or using her voice in the space could be really powerful, but also giving her permission to like not show up. I know that sounds antithetical and probably offensive to people in ministry, but this really is a time in a woman's life when she needs to be resting and she needs to be served and loved on. And as a church community, as believers, we could do a better job showing up and just saying, it's okay, rest, I'll take the baby. It's okay, rest, I'll do the laundry. And replicating that as the people of
It's
God.
okay. I'll
It's okay.
you lay in bed with the baby and I'll clean the entire house because um I want to clarify that because so many people want to swoop into a postpartum mom's house to see
And
the
hold the
baby,
baby.
but that can be really disruptive to the nursing relationship, which can then impact her mental health. And so rather than trying to snatch up a baby for baby snuggles, which I get you want, go wash something and say, if you want me to take the baby, we'll happily do so. But otherwise, you feel free to do skin to skin or nurse or whatever.
Mhm. Yeah, I tell my support system people that I work with all the time, um, give her 2 to 3 options and let her choose. I can do the laundry, I can walk the dog, I can hold the baby, or something of that nature. Because well, and then she might have decision fatigue, in which case you get to choose. But yes, um,
Or
starting
just show up and start doing. Like,
just do. Don't show up to be served.
yeah. And don't show up and only like never this is just tangent, not necessarily. Don't show up to a postpartum mother's house, first of all, empty handed. Bring food, even if it's a prepackaged snack and not a whole meal. Show up with a piece of chocolate or something for
Mhm,
her and
mhm,
stop giving baby blankets. That's another rant. Um, she has 30. She doesn't need another one. But also, if you are going to meet the baby, do something, clean something, meet the baby. Great, wonderful. Yes. But also, swish the laundry, wash the dishes, mop the floor, literally clean something. Like, it should be like a 3-to-1 exchange.
mhm.
One baby snuggle, a chore, some food, and some, "Oh, you're so pretty." Like,
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
that's my thing. 'Cause I see I because of my work with the Natural Christian Mamas Ministry, I see so many moms struggling postpartum with these very specific issues, and they don't have the energy to fight with the people in their lives, so here I am fighting the people in their lives for them. Um,
I appreciate it. My clients too.
yeah. Yeah. Okay. All right. Last question. If healthy women in safe marriages don't turn down good sex for no reason, what needs to happen for more postpartum women to feel safe and healthy again? And I want to clarify because somebody jumped me one time when I was made that statement in relation to postpartum. No, you're not unhealthy in postpartum. No, pregnancy and postpartum is not an illness to be treated. When I say healthy women, I am referring to the fact that pregnancy and postpartum is an altered state of the baseline that God designed overall for you. It's not something that needs medical treatment. I mean, altered from the baseline. Okay. Don't come for me. So, what do you more postpartum women need to feel safe and healthy again?
Yeah. According to my research, they need attunement and they need autonomy and cognitive flexibility. So the
Okay.
individuals who have the
What's
highest
autonomy and what's cognitive flexibility?
the individuals who had highest levels of sexual satisfaction were given psychological autonomy, which I'm going to define. Meaning, so in the church, we like to do this really weird thing where we sanctify fusion. As a mental health provider, fusion
What is fusion?
You're gonna drive me nuts. Fusion is when we say two people become one, and instead of still having two independent identities, we give up self completely and just fold ourselves into the marriage and who we suddenly became as one. So you give up self, you lose individual identity and everything beautiful that God made that is just you. And you give up certain pieces of that in order to become one with your partner. I am not saying becoming one is bad. I am saying that we have sanctified fusion in a way that we are allowing people to completely give up independent thinking. And as a generation of people coming from purity culture movement, we weren't really cheered on for thinking critically, much less thinking independently. We were celebrated for compliance and for falling in line and doing what we were told and thinking like everyone else in the larger system. So, my research says
Obedience is obeying with a happy heart the first time you're asked.
with a smile and quickly
Yeah.
and completely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, in my research, those who are highest in sexual satisfaction, those who scored highest in sexual satisfaction, were people who were able to have some independent thought. So go to their partner and say, you know what, I'm really beginning to question like this whole I have to stay home and take care of the house thing. And then they're met with a partner who says, oh, wow, yeah, tell me more about that. Or, oh, interesting. That must feel really like vulnerable to be questioning or getting curious about a belief system that you've had for 20 years or something along those lines. So that would be again the attunement piece, but also supporting one another in independent thought. The other bonus point that I saw consistently in my findings were if the partners, if the husbands then said, you know what, I've been thinking about my role, or I've been thinking about what it means to be a man. And if maybe I've been misinterpreting some scripture, I'm also revisiting some of my theological assumptions. And so, two independent individuals thinking critically and in curiosity, which is not without conviction, it's just growth, and then growing as a couple at the same time. So, we have the independent growth going on, and then we come back and we're growing as a couple as well and practicing some of the changes that we're adopting if we are adopting changes in our belief system. So, if healthy women in safe marriages don't turn down good sex, I'm reading your question for no reason.
Yes.
The things that need to happen is for couples to allow one another that autonomy of thought, so that freedom, the ability to not be so fused as one that we lose our sense of power. Because when we're stripped of power, when we're stripped of freedom, marriage is no longer a choice. It's an obligation. And if it's an obligation, that's not sexy. God doesn't God doesn't call us to follow him out of obligation. We get to choose. That's what free will is all about. And so a celebration of free will would be allowing one another some flexibility around thinking, even if it's different. Different doesn't mean disconnection, just means different. To be different and connected and grow together is what it's all about. It's what marriage is all about. And that will lead to happier, sexier sex in the postpartum period.
Thank you. Sexier sex is an official term,
Yeah.
although one I don't need to ask you to translate.
Mhm.
Um,
Good. I'm
one
sure.
of the one of the running jokes between Dr. Ashley and I is she uses big fancy psychology words, and I go, "Nobody on the internet knows what that means. Say it in normal people language, please." And then she gets tired of my nonsense. Um,
I'm trying.
all right. Do you have any final thoughts?
I don't think so. I could talk about this for hours. I literally just wrote
Same.
163 pages on it. So I just could go on and on and on. I mean, if listeners don't know the word matrescence, I think that's a powerful word that we need to talk more about in culture at large, especially within the subculture of Christian groups. Matrescence is the term that refers to becoming a mom. And we know from way back when, I think it was 1975 when that term was first coined, that motherhood is not just something that happens when you conceive or when you give birth, it's a process. And this individual who coined this word noticed, like, oh, moms are really growing into a new version of themselves. And we know from brain science that women's brains never go back to how they were prior to having kids. Like, we are physically changed forever and all time once we biologically have a baby. And this word really encompasses all of that change and the metamorphosis of what it is to become a mom. Um, what we know now in 2025, which is when this is being recorded, is that matrescence rhymes with adolescence. They're supposed to be mirror terms where matrescence is like a maternal version of adolescence. And what we know now is that the brain actually lights up, like there's neurological activity going on in the same areas of an adolescent brain as a maternal brain during this stage. We're doing a ton of same tasks that the adolescent is doing just in a new season. And so in my work and my research, I coin it as a puberty redo, an adolescent redo, which for this population is so sacred and so powerful because that means that matrescence is a rich opportunity for reclaiming sexual pleasure, sexual connection with a partner, any pieces of a marriage that are broken. It might feel exhausting. The brain is literally primed for change and for growth in a way that it won't be ever again, and it wasn't before. So, my message I would leave the audience with is take advantage of matrescence, read about it, learn about it, and allow yourself to grow into new places of being you and being a sexy person.
Thank you so much for being here. I've been looking forward to this for months, and I am so glad that we got to have this conversation and that your research is going to continue to help mothers reclaim their sexuality after motherhood and babies and all of the things. So go have good sex. So many women were taught that a fictionalized idea of purity was the goal. But what if wholeness is the real prize? Dr. Ashley reminded us today that healing takes time, that growth is possible, and that our faith doesn't have to keep us stuck in shame. Whether you're navigating postpartum, rediscovering your body, or learning to connect with your spouse again, you can rewrite your story and still honor the God who's offering you wholeness. If you loved this conversation, go follow Dr. Ashley at Pearl in Process and share this episode with a mom who needs to know that she's not broken. She's becoming. Go have good sex because healing women in safe marriages deserve it.
That's it for today's episode. You've been blessed and probably slightly scandalized. Now go journal, go text your man, and most of all, don't keep this to yourself. Share it, review it, slide into my DMs. Then grab a journal, a game, or a coaching spot. And remember, Jesus didn't die for you to have boring sex. So go have good sex already.